So a massive welcome, a great turnout this Wednesday. It must be because the weather's bad where I am at any rate, and you're all staying indoors, or it's because we've got fantastic speakers, which we obviously are very excited to introduce you to. Those of you who haven't joined one of our Wednesday lunchtime Zooms before, my name is Anna Burley. I am the Cooperative Party's Policy Officer. Apologies for members who have been spammed by me this week, and a welcome back to those faces I recognise from previous Wednesday lunchtimes. It's really nice to see some new faces as well, so welcome if it's your first time. Quick bit of housekeeping that old timers will be thoroughly bored of hearing each week. First is to let you know that we're recording this session. We record all of our public Zooms, and it means that those who can't join us in person live are able to catch up afterwards on YouTube. So if you know of somebody who is keen to get involved and wasn't able to dial in, then do direct them to our YouTube channel where they can catch up and listen to the conversation. What that does mean is that if you don't want to be filmed, you need to turn off your camera now. If you go on my screen, it's the bottom left, there's a stop video button, and if you're in a state of undress or you just don't want to be on camera, you can hit the stop video button and you won't be included in any recording. Broadly, if you're not asking a question, you won't be included, but just bear it in mind if you are sort of doing other things in the background. The other thing to let you know is that you'll notice that I've kept you all on mute. It's not that I'm not interested in your contributions, it's just that I don't want them yet. It's hard to hear our speakers when we've got other people talking or with background noise, so please keep yourself muted. I'll unmute you if you want to ask a question in the interactive part in the second half. And in order to do that, there are a number of ways you can ask a question. There should be a participate button at the bottom of your screen that enables you to put up a virtual hand, and it lets me know as chair that you want to say something. There is also a chat function. You can write to myself, Anna, or to the Cooperative Party avatar, which is my colleague Izzy, who will be monitoring the chat, to let us know that you would like to ask a question or to type out your question for us to choose from or read out for you. If those technological options fail you, then you can email events@party.coop. That goes straight through to Izzy, who will flag any questions or technical difficulties with me. I hope that's all okay and makes sense. And so I will kick off with a bit of a plug. Apologies to our speakers. As we have published another chapter of our Owning the Future piece of work today. Those of you who signed up for an early sneak peek will have received it in your inboxes shortly before this call, and it's super relevant to what we're talking about today. It's around creating a plan for a place-based economy, and it builds on lots of the ideas that Joe and Rokhsana and others are doing in practice on the ground, where labour and co-op values are in government. We're able to get on and do this, but it looks at how we feed this practical experience and action into a plan to make our economy grow in a sustainable and fair way after COVID and as we ease out of lockdown. It's got lots of ideas, some around high street renewal, how we tackle empty shops, how we cooperativize from a very bottom-up way and empower local government to be able to lead a lot of that work. So I will just suggest that you go to party.coop/owning the future to find the latest chapter. I'm always very happy to hear your feedback. You can get me on policy@party.coop. And if it's something that you would like to talk about with your local branches, equally get in touch and we'd be happy to help facilitate. So rather than you having to hear from me too much, I'm going to hand over now to our first speaker. We're going to kick off with Rokhsana. Rokhsana joins us from Newham, who are doing some incredibly exciting work around community wealth building that they launched pre-COVID, but I'm sure are bringing lots of those ideas with them as they look to make sure that Newham's economy opens up safely and with lots of prosperity for its residents. We'll also be hearing from Joe Cullinane, who's dialing in from Scotland, up in North Ayrshire, where they have recently launched a very exciting community wealth building strategy. And when she has been able to log in, Jo Platt, who was our Labour and Cooperative MP in Lee until the election in 2019, is going to talk about her work as a commissioner on the Greater Manchester Cooperative Commission with Andy Burnham, as well as how some of these ideas translate into winning back seats like Cllr that we need to be winning if we're going to have a Labour government. So enough from me. I'm going to hand over to you, Rokhsana, who has the best technology of anyone we've had on one of our Wednesday lunchtime Zooms. So I hope you're all as impressed as I am. Are you all right to unmute yourself? Lovely. All right, over to Rokhsana. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you so much, Anna, for the lovely introduction. And hello, fellow cooperators. And I'm really pleased to be joining you in this really important series of discussions that have been initiated by the team. And some of you may be aware, I stood on a platform around inclusive economy, but also I stood as a Labour and Cooperative candidate for the Mayor of Newham. And I'm really pleased to be joining you all in this vital discussion as we begin to craft and shape and ensure that the values and the principles of our long-standing movement are very much at the fore of political discussion and policy debate and shaping the future of the COVID-19 economic recovery. Obviously today, as we speak, the Chancellor, Rishi, is presenting his sort of big, bold statement around how Britain will be brought back to work given the devastation that COVID-19 has had in the economic sense, as well as in the public health and the human costs that we've borne witness to over the last 3 months. I also want to just make a quick shout out to local cooperatives members, because I'm sure they will be remiss if I didn't mention them. So I can see Jose Alexander on this Zoom chat, as well as Councillor Neil Wilson. And if there are any other Newham members of the Newham Cooperative Party, my apologies for not noting or name checking you. So look, I'm going to go through 4 broad areas in the context of the focus of today's discussion. Hopefully I will not go over the 5 minutes that I've been allocated, but I'm more than happy to answer additional questions during the Q&A session. And I really wanted to commend the Co-op Party, you know, as part of its long-standing endeavour to bring new ideas to shape the future of this country, but also inform the politics of the world. And I'm looking forward to reading in more detail the report that was published today and in the future. And I know the aspects of the report which talk about the significance of the community coming together during this COVID-19 crisis has brought back into sharp focus the potency of residents and people working together. And I also recognise, as set out in the report, the focus that we rightly need to place, and that the Cooperative Party is rightly placing, on the deep-rooted scarring of inequality that is a prominent and profound feature of British society today. Our economy is fragile. It has been fragile for a considerable period of time, not least because of the impact of austerity measures that we have borne witness to over the last 10 years. And also I welcome the emphasis that the Cooperative Party in its own, you know, our future report places on democratising the economy, and this very much aligns with our radical approach to you know, the economy that we're putting in place through our community wealth building agenda, which we launched early this year in January, pre-COVID, and was supplemented by an inclusive economy strategy, which we adopted back in December 2019 as part of our cabinet approvals. We've also recently this week seen the publication of another important area of my manifesto commitments that I made, and this very much links to the importance of ensuring you know, the Cooperative Party's drive towards an economy that favours you know, communities and favours people, as opposed to one that favours and is bent towards shareholders. In the publication of our Democracy Commission report, this was one of a series of manifesto pledges that I had made when I stood for office back in May 2018, where I was deeply concerned about the erosion of confidence and trust that the people of Newham had towards the council and the way in which the local authority under the previous administration had managed its relationship with its residents, too top-down, too paternalistic, we know best, and I was determined to change it. And as part of that determination, announced fairly on that I was going to be establishing an independent democracy and civic participation commission, which, in addition to looking at the existing governance model of the directly elected mayor here in Newham, would also look at all aspects of how we could improve participatory democracy, because I want Newham to be a beacon of participatory democracy in the country. We will be looking through that report, and we will be coming forward with fuller proposals, both to Cabinet and to full Council, with regards to aspects of the recommendations around participatory democracy that we will want to implement. But it's really important for me to express the serious intention and commitment that my administration has in this area, not least because of its relevancy to the subject matter that we're discussing today, i.e. the economics. We've already begun a process of kind of people's budgeting, because I want to get to a point at which we begin meaningful, genuine participatory budget setting with our residents, and how that enables them to be involved in decision making around investments in their local neighbourhoods. That's an important feature of being able to dissipate the trust that exists. And mistrust that exists, and this issue of mistrust between politicians, people, public institutions is not unique to Newham. This is a feature of the modern world, and it is leading to a real corrosive dynamic at play, where you have the rise of nationalism, you have a response to globalisation and the free market ideology that very much shapes the global approaches to the global economy. And in the context of what we have started to do, which culminated in the publication of the Community Wealth Building a strategy early in January, was to begin to look at ways in which Newham, which is the 9th largest local authority in the country, we have a population of 353,000 people. We have an annual spend of £1.5 billion. How we can reconstruct the operations and the systems, including procurement, in order to enable us to be able to diversify our local supply chains, to enable cooperatives, localised cooperatives, to be involved in that process. We've also undertaken a significant piece of work relating to all the physical assets that we own in the borough, and are exploring ways in which we can unlock them for use of the community. We've committed to at least one community land trust, housing development in the borough, and progress as well underway with regards to that materialising before the end of my first term here in Newham as mayor. The thing that I would say is that pre-COVID-19, we knew that both in terms of the human cost and the economic cost of COVID, we would be hard hit. We have found out and established that we are the local authority in London with the highest number of furloughed workers. We have an increase, a significant increase of claimants in terms of universal credit, and we are a borough that is starting from very, very marked position in terms of pre-existing inequalities, be they social, economic and health inequalities. 48% of our resident population presently are defined as living in poverty, and we have amongst the highest number of children living in low income households. We've started a huge amount with regards to council tax reduction scheme relief, where 90% of council tax doesn't need to be paid for across 19,500 households, and I'm committed to getting to, at some point in the future, 100% council tax relief for those households. But we need to be doing more than just those types of responses to the embedded, enduring inequality that has been a scarring feature of Newham for decades. And this is where the inclusive economy strategy comes into play, as well as revising and reviewing our procurement rules, where we place a huge amount of emphasis on social value, opening up and diversifying our supply chain to enable local businesses and local co-ops to really take advantage of that. We need to also build the right infrastructure to enable local cooperatives to flourish. And in the Newham context, in addition to the decimation of voluntary sector across the country as a consequence of austerity, it's been particularly acute here in Newham. We have already allocated money in a budget that we passed in early March, whereby we would invest in the rebuilding of the voluntary sector, and that includes supporting the establishment of localised cooperative bodies and organisations to help us begin to really reshape the local economy here in Newham. And COVID-19 has required and demanded of us to refresh our inclusive economy strategy. And I'm pleased to say that in a couple of weeks' time, I will be launching the Newham COVID-19 recovery strategy. It's predicated on an understanding that, yes, we've got to fundamentally reshift the way in which we approach local economic management, or ensuring that the livelihoods and the well-being of our residents is very much approached in an equitable way. It's very much still emphasising the importance of investment benefiting everyone and not just small groupings. It's also about ensuring still that we address those particular features of inequality that are experienced by particular community groups. And I also include in that approach the importance of us addressing long-standing race inequality that exists in our community. We have 73% of our resident population who are defined as Black, Asian, minority ethnic, and we know that many of them in terms of employment rates way below the London average, as well as the national averages that pertain to particular occupations across all the sectors. We also know that largely a number of our residents who are working are very much confined in those high vulnerability, high risk occupations that COVID-19 has brought into sharp focus in terms of infection rates and deaths. And that's something that we're also going to be tackling. In terms of the refreshed inclusive economy strategy as part of our COVID-19 recovery response, which, as I said, will be published in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm really, really excited about it. It will be very much embracing the core principles of tackling poverty, tackling inequality and race inequality, embracing climate emergency, and being demonstrating that Newham is going to be very much at the forefront of transforming our economy nationally, but also locally towards our climate change, climate emergency aspirations, where we will get to carbon zero by 2050 and carbon neutral by 2030. Next week, we will be taking to full council and to cabinet reports relating to our climate emergency action plan after 1 year of having signed up to the declaration, as well as work that we've done with a range of our residents who were involved in our citizen assembly on climate change. There's a whole range of work that we're doing in the climate emergency response agenda, and as mentioned by the National Committee that reports to Parliament on climate change, there's a huge amount that needs to be done still, and COVID-19 provides us a real opportunity to see a step change in the acceleration of our approach to transforming our economy so that we're able to meet those 2030 and 2050 targets. In terms of going back to the refreshed COVID-19 inclusive economy recovery strategy, there will be two additional features that will be of real prominence. The first is the prominence that we will maintain on the public health dimensions of our work here in Newham, because COVID-19 will be with us for a huge amount of time, or for a long period to come, until we get a vaccine. we're looking at least a couple of years. But what we've been doing as part of our conversation with the whole of London government is how we can use and seize this opportunity to ensure that we are rebuilding in a way that is better, rebuilding in a way that is co-collaborative with our residents, and rebuilding in a way that enables cooperatives in localised areas to flourish, to be part of the approach as we deal with the economic impacts of COVID-19, which in Newham will be very, very severe and catastrophic. As mentioned earlier, we will be, we've already allocated a significant amount of money to help build the capacity of the voluntary sector, and that includes cooperatives, and I'm very much looking forward to local organisations and local residents to be involved in that process going forward as we rebuild Newham following the COVID-19 pandemic. But as we do that, we've got to absolutely recognise the going back to the previous normal is not an option. The previous normal was undermining in its ability to really bring about the equality and the cooperative principles that we all subscribe to. Moreover, it will be insufficient given the challenges and the dilemmas and the significant economic catastrophe facing particular groups in our borough. We've already estimated that some 125,000 people will be left unemployed as a consequence of COVID-19 here in Newham alone, which is a significant increase in the number of those unemployed in our borough pre-COVID. I'm going to pause there. There's lots of detail that I can elaborate on around the work that we're doing to really seed a Newham-based cooperative movement to help us unleash the power and the potency of our people and our communities. But I'm very much committed about this and very much focused on ensuring that resident voice, community voice is very much at the forefront, working with us collaboratively in the future shaping of Newham. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, and clearly a vast amount going on, so a sort of hats off to Rokhsana and the rest of the team in Newham, because that sounds very thorough, and your residents are lucky that there's such a sort of cooperative bottom-up approach to regrowing after COVID. We're going sort of from London to Ayrshire. I'm going to hand over to Joe. Joe has recently launched a big community wealth building strategy for North Ayrshire and tells me that actually has been able to bring in all the other Ayrshires too. So some really exciting developments since we last talked about the strategy. I will hand over to Joe, who will be much better placed to be able to introduce some of that work and talk about what it means where he represents, as well as how we might perhaps be able to learn some lessons in our wider economic recovery. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks very much, Anna. And I think the first sort of point I would want to make is the amount of work that you've been putting in to this Owning the Future series. I think everybody in the Cooperative Party probably owes you a great deal of thanks for the amount of work and effort that's gone into developing these ideas and putting some detail behind them. So well done to you and the team.
That's very kind. I didn't pay Joe, I promise.
And obviously, Rokhsana's given a lot of detail about the vast work that's ongoing in Newham, and it's very interesting the synergies that there are between some of the ideas that Rokhsana's pursuing in Newham and some of the ideas that are being pursued in areas like North Ayrshire and other parts of the country. So it's always good to be sharing a platform with somebody like Rokhsana. I think I've been asked along here. Anna did say before we went live that this is the second time I've been asked along to a Cooperative Party session on Zoom recently, and I should be honoured by that. But I've been asked, I think, to come along because the geography and demographics of North Ayrshire is very different from obviously a part of London that Rokhsana's sort of taking these ideas forward. And the challenges for some of your people will be similar in terms of poverty and deprivation and various other challenges that they face in their day-to-day lives. But as a community, as a local authority area, it's very, very different. For those that aren't particularly up to speed with the geography of Scotland, North Ayrshire's a sort of local authority area on the west coast of Scotland. We actually have a number of islands within our local authority area. It's an area that very much was impacted by deindustrialisation in the 1980s. We had quite a lot of large manufacturing businesses who employed a great deal of people, and then throughout the 1980s we saw a lot of those big companies leave the area. And quite frankly, North Ayrshire and Ayrshire as a region's never recovered for that deindustrialisation. We've all played that traditional economic game. We're chasing inward investment, hoping that if it does land, then the benefits of that would trickle down to our communities and our residents. And quite frankly, it's completely failed. We aren't a city, we're not able to attract inward investment, and that extractive model has been shown to be broken anyway. So I've been very much looking for a way of redesigning the local economy in North Ayrshire and Ayrshire since I became council leader 4 years ago. We've been doing a number of things pre-community wealth building, but I think the idea of community wealth building and discussions that I had with Matthew Brown and Preston kind of brought a catalyst to me about this is the hook that we now need to put our ideas behind. And as Anna says, we launched our community wealth building strategy a few weeks ago in May. We had actually planned to launch that strategy before lockdown hit. We had a venue within North Ayrshire booked with a lineup of speakers. We couldn't take that face-to-face launch forward. So we brought it online. We went and streamed a live launch discussion on Facebook, and rather than having 100 people engage through an invited list at the venue, we ended up with 11,000 views on social media for the launch. So it has created a bit of a buzz, I would say, amongst local authorities in Scotland, which is very promising indeed. Our community wealth building strategy covers the 5 pillars that have been identified by Cllr, who are based in Manchester. It looks at procurement, our workforce and recruitment strategies, our land and assets, and an approach to using them differently. It looks at the financial power and includes longer term aims such as the establishment of a community bank across the west of Scotland. And it also looks at the ownership of the economy and looks at how we start to create an ecosystem of cooperatives and social enterprises and that, because quite frankly, we don't have that at this moment in time, and we are looking to build that basically from scratch. In terms of how we are starting to take that forward, already we've started to put in place some staffing resource, so we're recruiting 9 new posts to take our community wealth building strategy forward. Those posts cover a range of jobs, so regeneration officers, procurement, and business development managers, business support officers, etc. But I think the most important thing is for us to build on what we currently do have. So before the community wealth building strategy came along, we've got 6 localities in North Ayrshire. It's 6 separate sort of subsections of our local authority area. A few years ago, we created a community investment fund, and we delegated the resources in that investment fund down to our 6 localities for them to shape local projects which met the priorities of the local area. And interestingly, despite the fact that that came before the community wealth building strategy and work that we've now started to pursue, the vast majority of the projects that we have seen come through that community investment fund have included some form of community ownership. They have been used to leverage in additional money from other sources, and we're starting to see some really exciting projects starting to develop around some land and buildings. So for example, in one of our islands, we've got in Millport, we've got a disused town hall. The community are now in the process of taking ownership of that through an asset transfer. They've received funding from our community investment fund. and they're also looking to leverage in additional funding for a £3 million project to restore the town hall on the island to sort of productive use. And that's just one aspect of what's came through the Community Investment Fund. In terms of that, we're also looking at how we use other pots of money to start taking some of this forward. So we have bid to the Scottish Government Capital and Regeneration Fund, just approved some bids last week at our Cabinet. But again, every single bid that we've put forward this year involve community ownership. It involves a piece of land or a piece of a building, a physical building. And we're hopeful that if the Scottish Government are actually interested in community wealth building, then they'll see the place-based approach to the bids and support, hopefully, them with some funding. We've also set aside a £9 million pot of money in the budget, which we've just called an investment fund, which is looking at how we start to look at municipal energy generation, renewable energy generation, bring a fresh income stream to the council. But everything that we do through that investment fund will be viewed through the lens of community wealth building. How do we make sure that the investment that we do put in there looks to benefit the community through supply chains or through recruitment, etc. In general, that will involve land and assets, and we're mapping out all our land and assets across the whole of North Ayrshire at the minute, and looking at how we can use them for municipal and other generative forms of ownership for new enterprises. The paper that you've published today, Anna, talks about high streets and buying back buildings and that's very much part of the strategy that we've been kind of adopting so far as well. So we have been building council houses for the last few years. We've got a council house building programme, which in total involves constructing 1,575 new council houses. Quite a substantial house building programme given the size of North Ayrshire. And we're looking at how that fits into a regeneration and town centre strategy. And one of the most recent sort of projects that we have explored was the purchase of a disused pub. It's a C-listed building within our biggest town, Irvine. We've taken ownership of that as a council, and we're looking at regenerating that and turning it into housing for older people right on the heart of the high street. And that's the type of project that I think, as we look at where we are as a result of COVID, as we look at how we build more generative forms of ownership and start to create a different economy, they're the type of things that we need to be looking to do for our citizens. Clearly, we want to take a sort of regional approach to this, as Anna says, so we're starting to work with East and South Ayrshire, and that very much learns the lessons of what's been achieved in Preston. So Matthew Brown would be the first to tell people that in Preston it's a district council, they've got a £20 million revenue budget. So the Preston model isn't just because Matthew Brown through the council has been able to start spending more money with local businesses, it's because they took this wider approach across the region, working with anchor institutions, the colleges, the universities, housing associations, etc., all who have shown a level of commitment to the idea of animating local supply chains, looking at the land and assets, etc. But when you put that into the context, Matthew Brown with a £20 million budget, in North Ayrshire I've got a £350 million revenue budget. That's you could times that by 3 if you look at East Ayrshire and South Ayrshire, and across the whole of the kind of anchor institutions, you could see that we spend £1 billion a year on procurement. So this idea that we don't have wealth within Ayrshire as a region is a myth. It's just about how we use that wealth to actually create a better economy and create jobs for our community. So that will be fundamentally important. But obviously, as us as socialists and as cooperators, it's not just about spending more money with local firms, which is good, but we actually want to be spending some of that money with cooperatives, worker-owned businesses, social enterprises, community interest companies, etc. So the plural ownership part of that is absolutely fundamental, and that builds on stuff that's happened in other areas with community wealth building, starting in Cleveland and the Evergreen cooperatives, where they've set up worker-owned cooperatives to fill gaps in their actual procurement supply chains and service the demand from the public bodies. I'm going to kind of finish up there because I know that we want to get into a Q&A, Anna, and I think that's important for people to be able to do that. I'm just going to finish on this point that obviously I said that we don't have that ecosystem of cooperatives, etc., in North Ayrshire at this moment in time, and it's very important for us that we bring in some expertise in that to help us along this journey, and we're doing that through the staffing resource that we've put into the budget. But the other thing that we have established is an expert panel, a community wealth building expert panel. It has representation for people who are involved in community wealth building, such as Neil McEnroe for Cllr's, but also people for the Democracy Collaborative in America. But it also has, as its chair, Sarah Dees, who was the Chief Executive of Cooperative Development Scotland, and is now involved in the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Scotland. And also Jess Thomas, who works for Cooperatives UK, and I think is their lead for place-based economies. So it's very important that we now have some of those people round the table in North Ayrshire, not just giving us ideas, but actually challenging the practice on the ground, holding not just myself to account, but also the officers and how we say that we want to take this forward and the ambitions that we've got for North Ayrshire. I'm going to end there because I could speak for longer, but I want to allow people to ask questions and we can answer them.
Wonderful, thank you. And having heard Joe talk about his work in North Ayrshire just a few weeks ago on a call for Scottish members, the amount of progress even that's been made in the last few weeks is so impressive. And it's always very exciting to hear that Sarah Dees is still involved, because she was a great friend when we were looking at how we can grow the cooperative sector in Scotland through our implementation group work with the former Shadow Chancellor. So excellent news, and thank you very much. I know that lots of you will have been hoping and expecting to hear from Jo Platt, but I think she's been caught up in her previous meeting and isn't able to join us just yet. If she does manage to come in late, I will bring her in late. What I was hoping that Jo would talk about in part was the Greater Manchester Cooperative Commission. Many of you will know that we have a Labour and Cooperative Mayor in Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. He launched the Greater Manchester Cooperative Commission, and Jo Platt was one of our commissioners on that. And it sets out how to make cooperatives flourish within the city region, and has some really exciting and innovative ideas that are actually going to sort of start to make this a reality, and just goes to show what sort of labour and cooperative values can achieve in power in another part of the country as well, and offers a bit of a model. Jo talks about having a panel, South Yorkshire as well, where we've got Dan Jarvis as a labour and cooperative mayor. They have an excellent panel looking at how they can grow the cooperative sector. So I will put a link to the information about the Greater Manchester Cooperative Commission recommendations in the chat for you, and hopefully we'll be able to get Jo Platt on for a future date, because I think applying some of this to how we win back seats is also a really important part of our jigsaw puzzle of being able to make this happen. But you're bored of hearing from me, and I would like to hear from some of your questions. I have a question from Val Stevens that I'm going to kick off with, as Val is a mayor, and I feel like we ought to give her due deference for the importance of it role she plays. Val, I'm going to unmute you if that's okay. Val Stevens, lovely.
Okay, thanks very much, Anna. No, we're a town council. I'm not in the same category as Andy Burnham and wherever. I think our
nonetheless, it's a very important civic role. Thank you. It was a good question.
We literally are the grassroots, let me tell you. The population, for anyone who may, it incorporates the town of Hebden Bridge and the village of Mydenroyd and the village of Cranvale. I'm sure one or two people have heard of Hebden Bridge, maybe. We've only got a population of about 9,000, and of course the grander plans that people talk about don't apply. And what I've said here is that when the various town centre funding plans came out earlier on, I think it was the end of last year, is that in this Calderdale as a district council is like some other district councils, is that it's a number of towns and villages, with a major town of Halifax. Trafford and Tameside are of places like that. And we were missed off because they said we were viable and thriving. But of course, we're also subject to floods, which severely hampers trading. One of the key things about Hebden Bridge in particular is the retail offer, which is very much independent traders of one sort or another. And of course, this is what COVID has hit most. And as a local authority, I think we're quite, well, I don't know whether we're unique, but we're getting close in that we own an independent cinema. That's been knocked back. We've had to shut. We don't think we can probably open till September, October, and that was a source of revenue as well. So various things. So what I'm saying is, it would be useful to know comparator places about how successful they've developed a cooperative agenda in their authorities. The big authorities you can learn something from, but it doesn't apply at our level. And also, does anyone have any thoughts about what the Chancellor has announced just in the half an hour before our meeting? Some interesting stuff in there, but I suspect the devil will be in the detail.
As it always is. And I guess part of the answer to your question, Joe, perhaps you might be able to help with when I'll take a couple more, but that it's not just about sort of applying a big place strategy to a small place, but how somewhere like North Ayrshire, presumably you have bigger and smaller localities, and how you can make sure that they're sort of mutually supported with these wider strategies and sort of things we're about to feed into her district council. I am going to invite, I think it was Kevin had a question about business improvement districts. Kevin Hawker, I think you might need to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Lovely. Right. My idea is to try and launch a cooperative version of business improvement districts. Now, in Birmingham, in different areas, we've got business improvement districts, but these are predominantly privately owned. Now, what these in effect do is these privatise the streets, which is wrong. I think that we need to be looking at something that's community focused and community orientated that can bring in independent businesses. So what I'd be looking for would be to try and get cooperative version of business improvement districts trialled in different parts of the country to see how they work, get local independents on board, and give communities a greater say in their area, rather than, you know, a bunch of large corporations sort of like dictating, you know, what the policies are for a high street, you know, and so on.
Thank you very much. And then we've got a question from Miriam. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question, Miriam.
Hi, just a bit of a clarification, please. Just asking Joe, because Joe, you mentioned about this pub. It sounded like you were converting into housing. Now, can I just clarify how you went about that? If it's a case of you maintained the pub but also had housing, because I'm just actually interested in how the local people, how they really welcome that development, because that's very important. How you get people on board if you are making such changes. Thank you.
Great. Should we do Joe and then Rokhsana? Is that okay? We'll do reverse order for this one. Lovely. Joe, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Anna, and I'll take them in order. So Val, I think you're absolutely right. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to community wealth building. What you would focus on in an area like Rokhsana in London is very different from where you would focus on in an area like my own North Ayrshire. And also there's areas in Scotland such as Edinburgh who face similar challenges to London, maybe in terms of land and the cost of housing, and it's very much starting to maybe replicate that sort of divide that we see across the country of a really prosperous south of England against the north of England, and that's kind of repeating itself with the east coast versus west coast in Scotland. So I think there's something in there for everybody in community wealth building. You just need to tease out how that approach could happen. So for example, I'm sure that your council doesn't have the financial resources to be particularly looking at procurement, for example, as being a priority, but you spoke earlier on about the cinema, and it's how do you maybe look at models of generating that type of approach. And Anna had said in terms of North Ayrshire, we do have localities that are different. And I said in my opening remarks, we have locality partnerships. But what we are looking at, particularly in areas where we think that they haven't been particularly served well with the traditional economic development model, is what we would call a deep town approach to community wealth building within some of these communities. So, for example, in the Garnett Valley, we are having discussions with some community groups about land and assets and how we may well sort of create some community groups and organisations to take ownership of that, potentially sort of raising the income for some of that work through renewable energy. So there is a community group who have planning permission for a wind turbine, and we're looking at how we can maybe support them through raising the capital, for example, to make that project happen. So we're looking at those approaches. In terms of our two islands, we're starting to work with both of them, looking at a 2030 vision for both islands. So let's not just get ourselves bogged down in the immediate misery of what's happening with COVID and the challenges that islands are going to have when they are reliant on ferry travel, for example, for people to go for tourism and hospitality, and Arran in particular is a tourist and hospitality economy. So they've got big challenges in the immediate future. But let's look at a 2030 vision for Arran, which looks through a community wealth building lens about the land, who owns the land, and how can we get it back into more community ownership? How do we animate some of the supply chains to create its own sort of ecosystem of support for the local economy on the island, etc. So that work started as well. So I would say I appreciate that there will be differences in terms of the structures of local government in England and what people can do, but I think it's about just teasing out what's the priority for you and try to mould that to your own level of governance. Kevin, really interesting idea about cooperative alternative to bids. We did have one bid in North Ayrshire. It was in probably the more affluent part of our locality. It was in Largs, a nice seaside coastal town. But it wasn't big corporations, I've got to say, that were at the heart of that. It was more the sort of small SMEs. It has disbanded though, so I think that there is issues with that bid model in general, and I think there is potential for doing things a bit different, to be honest. I'm quite interested in that concept of a cooperative alternative. Miriam, you were asking about the pub that I mentioned in my opening remarks. That pub's a C-listed building, but it's been shut for a number of years. It's got into a real state of disrepair. It was purchased by a private enterprise through auction, but they've not done anything with it. And really, it's this sort of balance between, we would like to be much more proactive in terms of using some of the powers that we do have as a council through CPOs, compulsory purchase orders, etc. It's often quite challenging to do that. In this circumstance, the owner of the pub was actually willing to have a conversation with the council about getting it off his hands. It was starting to become a bit of a liability for them, and they were very willing to have a conversation. So we've negotiated a reasonable price with them. We do potentially see a commercial unit, given it's on the high street, at the sort of street level frontage of it. But in general, the rest of the building is going to be converted into sheltered house. And looking at the models that we already have developed in other areas, where we create we don't call it a care village or a care hub, but we create sheltered housing, which is like a community centre in the middle of it. Like it's a communal area. There's services that go in, such as hairdressers and people go in and do classes, etc. So it turns the whole building into its own community, if you like, supporting the residents in there. That's the type of model that we're looking at for that particular project. It is something I think that we're going to have to, over the next few years, look to replicate in other communities, because I think sort of post-COVID, we're going to see a lot of businesses closing. We're going to see some more shuttered shops on our high streets, and they type of ideas, introducing housing back into town centres, probably is going to be absolutely essential to building a better economy.
Great. And Rokhsana, I'll hand over to you. I guess Val's question doesn't sort of necessarily fit directly with Newham, but when we're talking about high streets, you'll have bigger high streets, but also smaller local town centres and high streets that will be hard hit and that have lots of independent shops. So you might have some thoughts about how we create sort of that economic regeneration narrative, both in the bigger places and the smaller places within Newham, perhaps as a starter for 10.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, I was going to suggest in response to Val's question and statement, actually, notwithstanding the significance and scale of the community wealth building strategies that are being deployed here in Newham, elsewhere in London, Islington being one, and Camden, and what Joe has described in terms of what he's been able to advance with colleagues. There are aspects of that big place sort of strategy approach that are absolutely relevant to small places, because there is nothing stopping you, notwithstanding some of those strategic discussions that you will need to have with the principal sort of authority that governs, your area. There is nothing stopping you from beginning those conversations and undertaking that advocacy, not only with them, but all those significant anchor institutions that are features of your local economic landscape, if not within the town, but surrounding the town. And part of that could also include, an engagement with the hospitals. And Joe was right when he was in his presentation talking about the significance of anchor institutions, and one of the most significant anchor institutions across all local authority areas, albeit they span different borders, is the health ecology that manifests and actually is the source of billions of pounds that are being spent. So in Newham, in addition to our discussion and engagement with our localised anchor institutions, we've also started a conversation with NHS London with regards to the billions of pounds that is spent across our STP footprint, how much of that can be really drawn down to bring community wealth building to life, not only for the benefit of Newham residents, but for all the local authorities within that STP area, and similarly driving forward the community wealth building agenda in a sub-regional system that we're involved in, also in London. But Anna's right, also the aspects and dimensions and features of community wealth building, as well as driving those forward at a kind of strategic corporate level with these anchor institutions, and how it shapes vision and how it shapes and informs how we spend our money, be it with regards to regeneration programs, etc., etc. Absolutely, how we need to also drive it down into hyperlocal areas. So we've already allocated a budget of £25,000 per 8 community across all of the 8 community neighbourhoods that we have structured in the borough, and those comprise of around 3 wards each. So that's approximately 24,000 people. £25,000 is not enough, but it's a start, and we're working through how we can use our Section 106 conditions and our community infrastructure levy in order to allocate a greater proportion of that to local neighbourhoods, very much in a similar vein to what Joe described. So I wouldn't be overwhelmed or or leave this conversation thinking that those principles of community wealth building, inclusive economy cannot be deployed at a hyperlocal or localised level in terms of the town and the community that you represent. I think the significance of needing to sharpen our focus on our local high streets is going to be a fundamental one. One of the, amongst the things that we know, COVID-19 is going to have an absolutely significant impact in terms of people's ability, appetite to want to travel on public transport because of the fear and risks of infection. We are going to need to reorientate our way of living in ways that allow and enable people to, yes, work from home, because more of that will happen, but also enabling them to be able to walk or cycle or use all of those sustainable transport methods to be able to shop as well as buy goods. And one of the things that we will be outlining in our inclusive economy approach to COVID-19 recovery in a couple of weeks' time is this philosophy and concept of a 15 minutes sort of rule or principle, whereby anyone living in Newham only needs to travel by foot or by cycle for 15 minutes to be able to access all the things that they need to be able to live. So that's a really big, significant shift. I think the high streets are going to be absolutely decimated as a consequence of COVID-19 and the pause on the economy during that particular phase of lockdown. But these are features that were well known and had appeared in previous years. Again, we're going to need to have to reconceptualise notions and concepts of what the high street is for, what it's about, and that provides great opportunity for us to really bring them alive with, you know, embedding that community dynamism and innovation, be it the voluntary sector or be it small co-ops, etc., in our localised and hyper-local neighbourhoods. We've already started that through work that's been driven forward by our community wealth building division within our inclusive economy directorate here at the council, through a programme called Shape Newham, where in the first instance we're improving the public realm, making it more appealing, more attractive, more nice to be in, because a lot of our urban spaces across London, not just in Newham, are pretty hostile and aren't particularly attractive, because there's been a real decline in sort of, you know, the focus on the importance of public realm and the environment to make people feel kind of really confident and comfortable about wanting to shop in their local areas. The other thing that I would say, just by way of a quick conclusion, you will have heard last week when the Prime Minister sort of, you know, alluded to this great new FD Roosevelt kind of New Deal for the country, that in addition in September, a relaxation of planning powers and planning policy will be brought forward to enable empty shops and premises on high streets to be converted into homes. We need to be very vigilant to ensure that we don't lower standards, but we should also not be fearful. I think this could be seized as an opportunity to transform our local high streets in the way that I've just described, in terms of a sustainable, future-looking, 21st century, you know, way of living that enables us to also meet our climate emergency, you know, commitments because of the environmental catastrophe facing the planet.
So brilliant. I think we've got to the end of our hours, so although I know there are other people with questions who were keen to contribute, I think I'm going to need to wrap it up, but I will pass questions on to both Joe and Rokhsana, because I'm sure you'll be really interested in the kind of feedback we've had, all sorts from how places with sort of similar issues in different geographies can network, through to the use of technology as we enter into a new economy. A really important question about when we talk about place-based economies, what does that mean for BAME communities who have been particularly hard hit by COVID and who are anyway excluded from many of the jobs market or pigeonholed into much lower wage jobs. A great question about the role of the third sector. So sort of a really wide-ranging set of thinking and questions and ideas that your contributions have sparked. So a massive thank you to both. Keep up the good work. It sounds like an absolute whirlwind, and I'm sure if we were to get you both on in a week, we'd find that sort of North Ayrshire and Newham are already sort of well on their path to transformation. So thank you so much, and it's lovely to be able to hear from and profile our amazing cooperative leaders in local government, because while we're plugging away nationally, these are the people in charge making change happen for communities on the ground, and a lesson that we can all take home to our own parts of the country. If any of you on this call are local councillors, don't forget to join us at 6 p.m. tonight. It is set up to be an excellent one, and I know that The Cooperative Council WhatsApp group is also a great place for those of you who have asked on how to get more involved and share examples. Join our WhatsApp group. I can see a few members like Miriam on here already, and we've been busy sharing best practice on there, so do get involved. And otherwise, thank you very much. Check out party.coop/owning the future for the latest chapter and some bedtime reading for you tonight. And we will see you next week with our next chapter and some more speakers. So thank you, look after yourself and stay safe. Bye-bye.